Good afternoon, Andy and Chris. Today we'll look at last week's actually internet weather. First, going through the top 10 most probed ports as we always do, and the top 10 ports actually looks like it. I think there are not much changes in the sense. If you look at the top 4 and 5, top 5 basically, there's no change from last week. The first one is taken by Telnet port 23 TCP. IC, the next is AT&T 6379 related to some Dockers. And 22 is SSH, 389 is related to LDAP. And basically, there's 237576 related to some IoT botnet and rounding up with AT-TCP. And next, we'll go to the most sources probing. Again, actually, there's a little bit of changes here compared to last week, except for the top 2, which is 445 and 23 TCP. Actually, 44 TCP, actually, that SMB is related to SMB with the UPN proxy, and the latest for SMB vulnerability. I think it's time to basically take a look at this port. 555 is used by Android debug bug at position 5. Again, at 9 is 389 UDP. I'll go a little bit about 389 UDP, how it looks from our common backbone perspective. And later, actually, I have one more slide looking at the next top 10 port probes, and another port basically looking at why I'm looking at that specific port. Starting with 389 UDP, basically we are seeing here in the sources probing as well as the probed ports also, which is basically pointed out by the red arrow here. So 389 UDP is used by, LDAP, and we all know with Log4j, but there's a little bit of activity with 389. With some of these ports, as you can see. There was some activity happening in the last 90 days, especially in the middle of December timeframe, and kind of it's continued for a little bit of time. But if we compare back, the activity kind of scaling a little bit down, but still at higher levels. Here we are showing the flows of activity with respect to 389 UDP. And the next graph in this scenario, what we are showing is the activity. I'll take it back. Basically, in this graph, what we are showing is the number of unique scanners, which means basically how many different scanning IPs are involved on the specific port at any point of time, scanning for 389. As you see, it's kind of started from the first week of December. I think it peaked around, close to 6,000 IPs per hour. And I think in the new year, it kind of jumped a few times. I think at least Magnusgate, three times. And at point, I think it reached about 17,000 IPs at one point. And again, since a week or 10 days, basically it kind of scaled down a little bit, but still at higher levels. I think this week, it's about closer to 7,000 IPs per hour. Even though the activity, the scanning IPs kind of scaled down a little bit, but the scanning activity is still occurring. This is the geo IP map of all the scanners involved. In this case, for example, maybe at one point, there was about 16,000 IPs, right? I think those IPs were put into a geo IP. Basically, this shows the heat map where most of them are concentrated. It's basically giving the little bit representation of how the breakdown of the source IPs were there. At that time, this graph was taken from January 10th, 2022. And at that time, there were IPs basically coming from about 90 data center clusters. And all of them seems to be related to security researchers in the sense they're just scanning. Today, I couldn't able to get the graph for some reason. I think it is not able to populate it. But there were about 7,000 IPs also in the cluster from the different clusters. Again, all of them seems to be from the security researchers. what does it tell? I think scanning activity is happening, but the number of scanners, IPs have basically dwindled a little bit down. But the activity is still going on. I just want to pause and get your thoughts. What do you guys think about 389 UDP? Any additional inputs on a specific port with respect to Log4j? Any other new tactics observed on this port?
So Ganesh, if you go back to that one there, what I find interesting, because I've seen a lot of these graphs, and usually it's a very gradual, like it's a very like sharp spike, and then like a gradual fall off is typically what we see. But what we're seeing here is just very angular motions, right? It's going straight up, it sustains for a bit, and then it goes straight down and kind of varies in that way. I mean, can you offer any sort of insight into why this particular scanning would afford itself in that way?
I mean, based on what are the reports we have looked at it, as I said, basically, these are all from the security researchers. I think what's happening is, for example, these are coming from the data clusters, right? Instead of one or two IPs, I believe they're throwing in a cluster of IPs at the same time. That's why we are seeing a sudden jump in actually in the number of scanners. For example, one cluster of IPs from, let's say, Asia Pac, they threw in like about 1,000 IPs. Another cluster from some Eastern European area, they threw in like 2,000 IPs just to scan it. I don't know why they're involving so many IPs to scan it. I mean, technically, you just need one scanner to scan, right? But what is the reasoning behind? I'm not sure, because looking at the flows, net flow data, all seems to be scans. There is no successful connections observed. I mean, at this point, I think it's a kind of like a scanning activity. Nothing else has been noticed. But
interesting.
I think, well, we are all actually keeping an eye on it, what's changing from day to day from scanning. I think probably we will find out something else as we go moving forward.
Yeah, I wonder if the increase in activity is also from what you mentioned for the recent Log4j vulnerabilities and CVEs that come out, since they do have an exploit involving LDAP queries. So I wonder maybe that's why the security researchers are checking all these different these IPs.
Yeah, so that's a possibility. That's probably a logical explanation. We could tell based on the security research involvement. Yeah, I think it all started with Log4j. If you look at the timeline, that's exactly points out to when it is started, when the scanning actually happened, and later was there's a patch happened. Again, there's a new patch came up, and again the scanning started. You know, kind of actually, if you pick up the timeline, I think more or less aligns with the Log4j different activities. In the Log4j in the cells, the Log4 shell basically. I think the common backbone of these graphs gives pretty good indications of something like this, like any new botnet activity, any scanning activity. It gives like a holistic view of what's happening, basically. Good points, both of you. I appreciate that. Then, with that, next, actually, I looked at the next 10 most probed ports. When I looked at the most probed ports, I'm not going to talk about all the ports, but you see that the last one, the 20th port, which is 1888 TCP. As you can see, it jumped so many positions. I think last week it was at 7,500 ranking. It jumped so many positions and came back to 20th position. So it's kind of obvious to see what caused this port to jump so many positions and land up into at least into top 20. So again, I relied on our common backbone ports, the activity looking back 90 days. As you see, it's kind of started over the weekend. It's very brand new activity happened. I mean, with the exceptions, there was some spike happened last week for a little bit. And there's another scanning activity, I guess, that happened in the first week of January. And then actually it kind of ramped up in the last few days. So this is showing about the volume, scan volume happening. Again, okay, there's a scan volume definitely increase. So sometimes this scan volume could be, like Chris, you pointed out, there could be number of IPs involved doing the scanning activity. So in order to see if that is true or not, we basically did again a scan skips graphing. In this case, I mean, there's a definitely increase, but if you look at the y-axis, that represents the number of scanner IPs in this case. In this case, these are all in single-digit numbers. I think they varied between 1 to 3 on an average, but in the last few days, basically it jumped to 11 at the peak, at the highest peak time, and about, I think, 8 at this time. What it tells, basically, only a few scanners are involved for the increased activity because it is not a high traffic port. I think it kind of jumped in volumetric effort. I think it landed into top 20 port. Okay, let's see what happened. So what is this port known for? So I think there's not much information on this port, but a little bit of research, I came to some of these conclusions. I guess as per IAM, I think it's used by APC and ECMP. I don't know what that used for. I couldn't able to find any information on that one. But in the past, it seems to be used by liquid audio. I think some of the servers used by liquid audio. But looking further, it is also used by a Tron protocol. This is first time I heard about Tron protocol. It's a kind of, I think, a P2P kind of port. I think it's some sort of related to some sort of crypto mining kind of a wallet kind of protocol. I think that uses this port, basically TCP and UDP port for P2P kind of activity. There are also other ports this protocol uses, but that's one key indicator. Actually, it's pointed to P2P ports are used by these 1888 TCP as well as UDP counterpart. While looking a little bit further research, there is a Ubiquiti AirOS AirView. Basically, this is a kind of OS used by some of the routers kind of devices, which offers basically wireless and routing features. That uses 1888 TCP. But again, actually, recently, I think maybe over the weekend, there was one blog spot from Morphisec. Actually, they said Log4j exploits actually using Unify network applications. Basically, Unify applications are manufactured by Ubiquiti. I couldn't able to find relevant information like a direct comparison to Ubiquiti AirOS, but I think manufactured by Ubiquiti. So still, I think it's too early to make connections that 1888 TCP activities might be related to the latest Log4j exploitation attempts. But I think there's a strong correlation. It might be related to Log4j at this point. But I'm still researching it. Hopefully, I'll have more concrete details to share in near future. I pause here. What do you guys think about Log4j angle for this specific port?
Yeah, I think it's definitely plausible. I mean, that port number is new to me. I've never really seen that come up on a lot of scans before. And I know the Log4j definitely kept me busy around the holidays this past year. So it's Log4j in almost every application involving Java. And it's very hard to get visibility in your organization sometimes, since it's probably some small application running on maybe a Kubernetes cluster or even just a server everywhere. So the growth of Log4j is definitely something to be aware of.
Yeah. Actually, just reminded. Basically, with this blog post came on January 20th. I think that is the timeline. Actually, we saw the increase in scans also. So kind of the timeline edge aligns with that activity.
Yeah, I'm willing to bet this isn't the last time that we're going to see some scan for, some small bit for log4j and some random application on some random port,
And I'm sure a lot of people don't even know that they're running log4j in their applications. It's such a small application, they might not even know.
Yeah.
Yeah. The challenge is basically even the log4j is up to date with patches, maybe underlying apps which are using it could be vulnerable. That's the challenge with log4j.